Hey guys, welcome to another Warframe video, and today it's going to be a little bit different because not only are we going to check out Ivara's Artemis bow, we're also going to check out my new build for Ivara, which uses the concentrated arrow augment. So the build I ended up going with is actually a 3 Forma build. You don't need one of the dashes, so all you do is reformat the D that Ivara comes with into a dash and then you add 2 V's. Now the aura I'm using here is corrosive projection. You can use something else, but corrosive projection is in my opinion the best because it helps with the upfront damage of concentrated arrow. It's not entirely necessary to run corrosive projection to strip away some of the enemy armor because of the build I'm running on Artemis bow, but it helps an awful lot. After that, I wanted a bunch of duration, so I went with primed continuity, augur message, and constitution. This is mostly here to balance out transient fortitude and fleeting expertise so that I don't have negative duration, and this way with this particular setup my prowl drains 0.33 energy per second when I'm not moving, which is fantastic. It also adds a tiny bit of extra duration to my quiver arrows, which is nice as well. Then I'm running cunning, drift, and stretch for some extra range, and this is really nice because it first of all increases the area of effect of all your quiver arrows. It increases the range in which you will still loot from enemies in prowl, but most importantly, it increases the explosion radius of concentrated arrow. This is an amazing augment for Artemis bow because while it only makes you fire one arrow rather than a line of arrows, that one arrow has 50% extra crit chance on a headshot and explodes on a headshot, damaging nearby enemies. Following that, we have primed flow, which is a very important mod on this setup because it allows me to bank 744 energy. And this is important because, as you may have noticed, this build sacrificed the only layer of defense that it had, and it relies solely on prowl to survive, which means that if you run out of energy, you're gonna die. So being able to bank a lot of energy is important. Then we have fleeting expertise for some efficiency. This helps with all of our abilities because it makes them cheaper, but it's mostly here for Artemis bow because it's kind of unique in that it's the only exalted ability that doesn't drain energy constantly. It instead uses a small amount of energy, with the amount being determined by your efficiency every time you fire it. It just makes it a lot easier to sustain energy while you're prowling around and shooting your Artemis bow at the same time. And the final mode on the menu is transient fortitude for some power strength. This one isn't entirely necessary, it's just here to add some damage to my Artemis bow, so you can easily swap it out for something else, like quick thinking for example, if you would like another layer of defense. Just bear in mind that you will have to format this differently if that's what you want to do. And finally, I'm running Arcane Healing and Arcane Resistance, which give me a pretty high chance to resist a radiation or a toxin proc respectively, both of which are extremely dangerous for a setup like this. Now for my Artemis bow, I decided to go with a fairly cheap one Forma setup where I just added a dash. And it's a pretty standard sort of hybrid Hunter Munitions viral setup. And the mods I'm running here are Serration for more damage, Split Chamber for multi-shot, Point Strike for crit chance, Vital Sense for crit damage, and then Vigilante Armaments for even more multi-shot. This makes it kind of more reliable and less reliable at the same time. It guarantees you that you will fire a second arrow because of multi-shot, but it also gives you a 50% chance that you will fire a third arrow. And the damage difference there is actually quite substantial because, getting 3 explosions rather than 2 is a pretty big deal. Then I'm running Hunter Munitions, which gives me a 30% chance to affect the enemy with a slash proc on a crit, which is going to be all the time when we headshot them. And we finish it off with Malignant Force and Rhyme rounds for some status chance and viral damage. And I would only really recommend this build if you're running a concentrated arrow setup on Ivara. It's not that great for the standard Artemis bow. Now the damage of this setup is a little bit, well not little bit, it's completely all over the place because there are so many different things that can happen that will affect the amount of damage each arrow will do. But even the worst case scenario isn't too bad, the damage is still pretty solid. So first of all, you may or may not headshot, which sometimes happens because the hitboxes aren't perfect. Then you may or may not fire the third arrow thanks to multi-shot. Then you may or may not proc slash because it's only 30% chance on a crit, and you also may or may not proc viral. Oh yeah, and there's also a small chance that you will orange crit as well, because if you headshot the enemy, your crit is going to be slightly over 100%. So yeah, sometimes you will shoot an arrow and you will explode the entire room, and other times you will shoot a bombard in the buttocks and he's gonna be like, ooh, tickly, and won't even die. So I'll just say that this setup is full of surprises. Now one thing, well actually 2 things that I really like about the Warframe build are that number 1, it's a quality build, so you have no negative stats, which is always nice. And number 2, this kind of ties into number 1, because this is a quality build, you can easily take out Conk Arrow and you can put in Prowl if you want to do spy missions or something, and it's gonna work just fine as well. Now, one thing you may have noticed is that I'm getting the Argon Scope buff. This is just a bug. I have Argon Scope on Dread, which is what I'm currently running, and it just shows the buff while not actually giving you the crit chance. It's just a small visual bug that's eventually going to get ironed out. And as far as the Artemis bow setup combined with conch arrow is concerned, I like it a lot. The damage is a little bit unreliable, but it's not that big of a deal if you don't fight enemies that are over level 100. That's kind of where the cracks will begin to show, because the lower end of your damage will not be enough to clear rooms anymore. But when it comes to Star Chart, even Hind Star Chart stuff, Hind Nightmare missions, Hind Fissure missions, even Onslaught if you manage to survive there, or sorties, this is more than enough damage to get you through it. So I would highly recommend you give this setup a shot, because it is, as I've said already, a lot of fun. And that's pretty much it, so I thank you very much for watching. As always guys, I hope you've enjoyed the video and it was helpful, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.
Sons and daughters, pride, the heart of who we are, making peace to build a future, strong, united, working.